on the Cartesian demonstration of the existence of God, 1700 to 1701, from the French, by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, 1646 to 1716. In truth, metaphysics is natural theology, and the same God who is the source of all good is also the principle of all knowledge. This is because the idea of God embraces that of absolute being, that is to say, what is simple in our thoughts, from which all that we think takes its origin. Descartes had not considered the matter from this side. He gives two reasons of proving the existence of God. The first is, that there is in us an idea of God, since we undoubtedly think of God, and since we cannot think of anything without having the idea of it. Now, if we have an idea of God, and if it is a true one, that is, if it is of an infinite being, and if it represents it faithfully, it cannot be caused by anything less, and consequently God himself must be its cause. He must therefore exist. The other argument is still shorter. It is that God is a being which possesses all perfections, and consequently possesses existence, which is in the number of perfections. Hence he exists. It must be confessed that these arguments are a little suspicious because they advance too quickly and do violence to us without enlightening us, whereas true demonstrations are wont to fill the mind with some solid nourishment. However, it is difficult to find the knot of the matter, and I see that a number of able men who have made objections to Descartes have passed this by. Some have believed that there is no idea of God because he is not subject to the imagination, supposing that idea and image are the same thing. I am not of their opinion, and I well know that there is an idea of thought and of existence and of similar things of which there is no image. For we think of something, and when we remark what made us recognize it, this, so far as it is in our soul, is the idea of the thing. This is why there is also an idea of what is not material or imaginable. Others admit that there is an idea of God, and that this idea embraces all perfections, but they cannot understand how existence follows from it, be it because they do not admit that existing is of the number of perfections, or because they do not see how a simple idea or thought can imply existence outside of us. For myself, I well believe that he who has acknowledged this idea of God, and who fully sees that existence is a perfection, ought to avow that this perfection belongs to God. In fact, I do not doubt the idea of God any more than his existence. On the contrary, I claim that I have a demonstration of it, but I would not that we flatter ourselves and persuade ourselves that we could succeed in so great a matter at so little cost. Paralogisms are dangerous in this matter. When they are not successful, they rebound upon ourselves and strengthen the opposite party. I say then that we must prove with all imaginable accuracy that there is an idea of an all-perfect being, that is to say, of God. It is true that the objections of those who think that they can prove the contrary because there is no image of God are, as I have just shown, worthless, but it must also be confessed that the proof which Descartes offers for establishing the idea of God is imperfect. How, he will say, can we speak of God without thinking of him? And could we think of God without having the idea of him? Yes, undoubtedly, we sometimes think of impossible things, and this has even been demonstrated. For example, Descartes held that the quadrature of the circle is impossible, and yet we do not cease to think of it, and to draw consequences as to what would happen if it were possible. Motion of ultimate swiftness is impossible in any body whatever. For if it were supposed in a circle, for example, another concentric circle surrounding the first and attached firmly to it would be moved with a velocity still greater than the first, which consequently is not of the ultimate degree, contrary to what we have supposed. All this to the contrary, notwithstanding, we think of this ultimate swiftness, which has no idea since it is impossible. So the greatest of all circles is an impossible thing, and a number made up of all possible units is no less so. There is proof of it. And nevertheless we think of all this. This is why there is certainly room to doubt whether the idea of the greatest of all stars is to be trusted, and whether it does not involve some contradiction. For I well understand, for example, the nature of motion and of swiftness, and what greatest is. But for all that, I do not understand whether all this is compatible, and whether there is a way of joining all this, and making therefrom an idea of the greatest swiftness of which motion is capable. So although I know what star is, and what largest and most perfect are, nevertheless I do not yet know whether there is not a hidden contradiction in joining all these together, as there is in fact in the other examples mentioned. That is to say, in a word, I do not know for all this whether such a star is possible, for if it were not, there would be no idea of it. However, I confess that God in this respect has a great advantage over all other things, for it is sufficient to prove that he is possible to prove that he exists, a thing not encountered anywhere else that I know of. Furthermore, I infer from this that there is a presumption that God exists, for there is always a presumption on the side of possibility. That is to say, everything is held to be possible until its impossibility is proved. There is therefore also a presumption that God is possible, that is, that he exists, since in him existence is a consequence of the possibility. This may suffice for practical life, but it is not sufficient for a demonstration. I have disputed much on this point with several Cartesians, but finally I have gotten some of the more able to frankly confess, after having understood the force of my arguments, that this possibility was still to be demonstrated. There are even some who, after being challenged by me, have undertaken to demonstrate this, but they have not yet completed it.